Sergeant Major Davis frowned at the personnel roster on his desk. Something didn't add up. Private First Class Michael Torres, E2 rank, assigned to the Provost Marshal's office 3 months ago. Standard background check, clean. Standard training records, unremarkable. Standard everything, except for one thing. The file was flagged with a classification marker Davis had only seen a handful of times in 25 years of service. Need to know, do not discuss. Why would a private, a nobody doing traffic duty on a military base, have a classified personnel file? Davis picked up his phone and called the base security office. Yeah, I need a clearance verification on a soldier. Torres Michael, Private First Class, ID number Charlie 739. The security officer cut him off mid-sentence. Sergeant Major, I'm going to stop you right there. That file is above my clearance level. You need to contact the installation commander's office directly. Davis stared at the phone. Above clearance? For a private? He hung up and called Lieutenant Colonel Morrison, the Provost Marshal, his boss, his direct supervisor. Sir, we might have a problem. That new private, Torres? His file is flagged classified. Need to know basis. And this morning, he wrote a parking ticket to General Caldwell. There was a long silence on the other end. Then Morrison's voice came back, careful and quiet. Does the general know who Torres is? No, sir. Nobody does. That's why I'm calling. The general is demanding Torres be court-martialed. Says he showed disrespect. Another pause. Longer this time. Keep Torres on duty. Don't let him leave the base. I need to make some calls. Davis hung up, a cold feeling settling in his stomach. Whatever was going on, it was bigger than a parking ticket. Much bigger. Before we continue, make sure to subscribe to Army Story so you never miss these true tales of courage. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? 3 hours earlier, Private First Class Michael Torres had been doing his job. He was 19 years old. At least, that's what his ID card said. He wore the single chevron of an E2 rank. His uniform was crisp, his boots polished, his demeanor respectful and quiet. He'd been at Fort Bragg for 3 months, assigned to the Provost Marshal's office, doing basic military police duties, checking IDs at the gate, directing traffic, writing parking tickets. He was invisible, forgettable, just another young soldier doing mundane work, which was exactly the point. That morning, Torres walked through the headquarters parking lot, checking for violations, reserved spots, handicap spaces, fire lanes, standard patrol. He stopped at a black Mercedes sedan parked in a space marked General Officer Reserved. No placard visible, no authorization displayed. Torres pulled out his ticket book. He wrote the citation methodically. Vehicle description, license plate, violation code, date and time, $50 fine. As he tucked the ticket under the windshield wiper, a voice exploded behind him. What the hell do you think you're doing, Private? Torres turned. Major General Richard Caldwell strode toward him, face red, 2 stars gleaming on each shoulder. The post commander, the highest-ranking officer on Fort Bragg. Torres came to attention. Sir, this vehicle is parked in a reserved space without proper authorization displayed. I'm issuing a citation per Fort Bragg Regulation 190-5. Caldwell stopped 2 feet away, staring down at the young private. Do you know who I am? Yes, sir. Major General Caldwell, post commander. And do you know whose car this is? I assume it's yours, sir. But regulations require proper display of authorization regardless of rank. Caldwell's jaw tightened. You're going to tear up that ticket. Right now. Torres met his eyes. His voice was respectful but firm. Sir, I can't do that. The regulation doesn't authorize me to waive citations based on rank. I'm not asking private. I'm ordering. Sir, with respect, you don't have the authority to order me to violate regulations. My chain of command is through the Provost Marshal. Caldwell's face went from red to purple. Give me your name and unit. Private First Class Michael Torres, sir. Provost Marshal's office. You just made the biggest mistake of your career, Torres. Caldwell ripped the ticket from the windshield, crumpled it, and threw it at Torres's feet. "I'm going to have you court-martialed for insubordination." He stormed off. Torres stood alone in the parking lot, watching him go. Then he bent down, picked up the crumpled ticket, and smoothed it out. He took a photo of it with his phone documentation and placed it in his citation book. He'd expected this. It was, after all, part of the test. The contrast between Torres and General Caldwell was stark in every visible way. Caldwell was 56 years old, a career officer with 34 years of service. His uniform displayed rows of ribbons, combat patches, Ranger Tab, airborne wings. He commanded 45,000 soldiers. His word was law on Fort Bragg. Torres was a private, the lowest rank, 3 months on post. No visible awards, no combat patches, no authority, except that wasn't entirely true. Because Michael Torres was not actually 19 years old. He was not actually a private, and his real file, the one Sergeant Major Davis couldn't access, told a very different story. His real name was Colonel Michael J. Torres, age 43, 25 years of service, former commander of a Special Forces battalion, recipient of the Medal of Honor for actions in Afghanistan in 2012, where he'd led a rescue operation that saved 32 hostages while wounded and under heavy fire. 6 months ago, the Army had approached him with a unique assignment. Fort Bragg had a problem, a culture of rank abuse. Senior officers parking illegally, cutting in lines, demanding special treatment. Junior soldiers were afraid to enforce regulations against anyone with rank. The Inspector General wanted to test the system, see if regulations were actually enforceable, or if rank privilege had become so entrenched that the rules only applied to lower enlisted. They needed someone who could operate as a private, but who had the experience, maturity, and courage to enforce standards against senior officers without backing down. They needed someone who understood that real leadership wasn't about rank, it was about integrity. Torres volunteered. The mission was simple: assume the identity of a young private, work in the Provost Marshal's office, and enforce regulations without exception. Document any abuse of rank. Operate under deep cover for 6 months. No one on base could know. Not his supervisor. Not his coworkers. Not even the Provost Marshal. Only 3 people knew the truth: the installation commander, the Inspector General, and the Secretary of the Army. Torres had been testing the system for 3 months. Small things at first: expired vehicle registrations, speeding violations, improper uniform wear. Every time he enforced the standard, and every time someone complained. But the complaints never went anywhere because no one could figure out who to complain to. Torres's file was sealed. His chain of command was classified. The parking ticket to General Caldwell was the biggest test yet, and Caldwell had failed spectacularly. Now, the system would have to respond. In his office, Lieutenant Colonel Morrison hung up the phone after making 3 calls. His face was pale. He'd just spoken to the installation commander, Major General Patricia Hayes, the only general officer on base who knew about Torres. The conversation had been brief and clear. "Let it play out," Hayes had said. "Caldwell made his choice. Now he gets to live with the consequences." Morrison called Sergeant Major Davis into his office. Closed the door. Davis sat down, confused and worried. "Sir, what's going on with Torres?" Morrison pulled out a folder. At the top, a red classification stamp. "Top secret, special access required." "What I'm about to tell you cannot leave this room," Morrison said. "Private Torres isn't a private. He's a colonel, Medal of Honor recipient. He's here on an Inspector General investigation into rank abuse and regulation enforcement." Davis's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. "Sir, what? The parking ticket?" That was a test. Caldwell failed. He tried to use his rank to intimidate a soldier into violating regulations. He threw away an official citation. He threatened court-martial for a soldier doing his job correctly. But Torres is a colonel. Was. For this mission, he's a private. And he's been documenting everything. Every officer who's tried to bully him. Every regulation violation he's witnessed. every abuse of rank. Davis sat back, processing. So, when Caldwell threatened him, he threatened a soldier under IG protection, performing an authorized investigation. Caldwell just ended his career. Morrison picked up his phone. General Hayes wants Torres to continue as planned. In 72 hours, there's a base-wide command formation. That's when the truth comes out. 3 days later, Fort Bragg held a mandatory formation in the main parade field. Every battalion, every unit, over 5,000 soldiers in dress uniforms, standing in neat rows under the Carolina sun. At the front, General Caldwell stood with the command staff, arms crossed, waiting for whatever announcement justified pulling everyone from work. Torres stood in the back row of his company formation, 3 months of growth on his face hidden behind regulation grooming, his E2 rank barely visible on his chest. Major General Patricia Hayes, the installation commander, stepped to the microphone. At ease, she said. The formation relaxed slightly. Today, I'm here to discuss integrity, specifically the integrity of our regulations and whether they apply equally to all soldiers, regardless of rank. Caldwell frowned, sensing something. 6 months ago, Hayes continued, the Inspector General authorized an investigation into rank-based preferential treatment at Fort Bragg. We wanted to know, do our regulations mean anything? Or are they just suggestions that senior officers can ignore? Murmurs rippled through the formation. To conduct this investigation, we needed someone who could operate at the lowest rank, but who had the maturity, experience, and courage to enforce standards against anyone, including general officers. Hayes paused. We found that person. For the last 3 months, he's been working in the Provost Marshal's office as a private. He's written citations, enforced standards, documented violations, and every single time he's done his job correctly. She looked directly at Caldwell. 3 days ago, he wrote a parking ticket to the post commander for parking in a reserved space without authorization. The post commander responded by threatening court-martial, attempting to intimidate the soldier into destroying the citation, and using his rank to avoid consequences for violating regulations. Caldwell's face went white. That soldier, Hayes said, is not a private. Colonel Michael Torres, please step forward. The formation went silent. Torres walked through the ranks, soldiers parting to let him pass. He reached the front and stood at attention. Hayes continued, Colonel Torres is a Special Forces officer with 25 years of service. He's a combat veteran with 3 deployments. And in 2012, he earned the Medal of Honor for leading a hostage rescue operation in Afghanistan. She turned to face Caldwell. General Caldwell, you threatened to court-martial a Medal of Honor recipient for doing his job with integrity. You attempted to intimidate a soldier into violating regulations. You used your rank as a weapon. Caldwell said nothing. There was nothing to say. Hayes's voice hardened. You are hereby relieved of command, effective immediately. You will retire at your current rank. Your actions do not reflect the values of this army or this installation. She looked back at the formation. Let this be clear, regulations apply to everyone. Integrity matters more than rank. And if you can't lead with honor, you don't deserve to lead at all. Then she did something no one expected. She stepped in front of Torres and saluted. A crisp, perfect salute held with absolute respect. Colonel Torres, thank you for your service. Thank you for your courage. And thank you for reminding us what integrity looks like. Torres returned the salute. His voice was quiet. Just doing my job, ma'am. The entire formation came to attention. 5,000 soldiers, enlisted and officers alike, saluting the man they'd known as a private. Caldwell stood frozen, watching his career end in front of everyone he'd commanded. After the formation, Torres walked through the base one last time in his private's uniform. Soldiers approached him, shaking his hand, apologizing for not treating him better, thanking him for what he'd done. Sergeant Major Davis found him outside the Provost Marshal's office. Sir, Colonel, I'm sorry. I should have figured it out. Torres smiled. You weren't supposed to. That was the point. Can I ask you something? Go ahead. Why did you volunteer for this? You're a colonel. a Medal of Honor recipient. You didn't need to spend 3 months getting disrespected by everyone on base. Torres looked at the soldiers walking past. Young privates, specialists, corporals, the backbone of the Army. Because they deserve better, he said simply. They deserve leaders who follow the same rules they do. They deserve a system that protects them when they do the right thing, even if it's unpopular. He pulled off the private's rank from his chest. Underneath, barely visible, was the outline where Colonel rank had once been sewn. Rank is temporary, Torres said. Integrity is permanent. I'd rather be a private with honor than a general without it. Davis nodded slowly. What happens now? Now I go back to my real job, Special Forces, where rank still matters, but character matters more. Torres handed Davis the private's uniform rank. Keep this. Remind people that the lowest-ranking soldier in the Army can be the highest example of what we should be. 6 months later, the Inspector General released a report based on Torres's investigation. 17 officers were disciplined for rank abuse. Fort Bragg implemented new training on ethical leadership. And the story of the private who outranked a general became legend. Today, at the NCO Academy at Fort Bragg, they teach a class on integrity. They start by telling the story of Colonel Torres, how he wore a private's rank to test the system, how he enforced regulations without fear, how he proved that real authority comes from character, not from the number of stripes or stars on your chest. At the end of a class, instructors always say the same thing: rank can be given. Integrity must be earned. And sometimes, the most junior soldier in the formation is the most senior leader in the room. Torres retired 5 years later at the rank of Brigadier General. But when soldiers who served with him talk about his legacy, they don't talk about his rank. They talk about the time he was a private and how he showed them that leadership isn't about commanding respect. It's about deserving it. Moral of the story: true leadership isn't measured by the rank on your chest. It's measured by the integrity in your character. Authority without accountability is tyranny. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is humble yourself to prove a point that needed proving. If this story moved you, don't forget to show your support. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to Army Story for more true tales of courage, sacrifice, and honor. We bring you stories that remind us that heroism isn't always about combat. Sometimes it's about having the courage to do what's right when everyone else is watching. Until next time, stay safe, stay strong, and never forget the heroes among us.